that is great about the developer experience. And specifically for the developer experience prospect, I have a question for Jyoti you one more time. Is what should a team publish along with a skill and MCP integration so that the another developer can understand, evaluate, and trust it?
Good question, because everything that we do is for developer experience at the end of the day. So I would just think of shipping a skill or an MCP like you're shipping a library. So if you're an engineering team, what you think about is the end result first, right? That what you want to do, and then you backtrack that how you're going to create it, and that is exactly how you should apply the logic over here as well.
Which
Right.
protection must be enforced by the MCP server or the underlying platform instead of trusting the skill?
So I would say this is an important distinction that sometimes people miss. A skill is only a guidance, right? It's not a enforcement. It won't tell the model that this is the recommended. Like it can tell the model that this is the recommended one flow. Step one will always come before step two, but it won't put the guardrails around the model to follow it, right?
Okay. Hello everyone. Good morning and welcome to the another podcast. AI agents are becoming capable of doing much more than the simply answering the questions. They can follow specialized instruction across API and inspect infra, read logs, understand deployment safe, and perform action across the external systems. But as these capabilities grow, developers are facing a new architectural design problems. What information should be placed inside a prompt? What should become a reusable skill? When do we need an MCP server? This is one of the important questions. And when somebody or when should have a skill and an MCP server work together? At first, the difference may appear simple. A skill can help an agent understand how to perform a specialized task, and an MCP server cannot or can connect the agent to external system and capabilities. But the actual decision becomes difficult when we begin dealing with the live information, changing schemas, tool execution, workflow, permission, security, and production reliability. If we choose the wrong approach, we may create the unnecessary context, additional tools calls, duplicate logic, more maintenance, and so and so. But the central question for today's discussion is about when should we use a skill, when should we use an MCP server, and how should both work together in a production ready AI agent. To help us understand this logic, I'm joined by two guests who work across the AI agent developer experience, DevOps, production engineering, and especially the open source communities. Our first guest is Jyoti Bisht. Jyoti is senior DevOps relation engineer and the DevRel leads at Harness. Her work spent around the cloud cost management. I have seen her work around the AI agent, product experience in the documentation, around the developer education, and especially the technical content. She is also the founder of the open source lead, if I'm correct, and it is based on the Codebase Cafe is the product where she helped many women begin and grow their open source journeys. So welcome to the podcast, Jyoti.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Yes, actually, it is Kodes Cafe. So I'm the founder for the open
Okay.
source track. So we have like pro bono mentorship program for women in tech, and usually it is for DSA. But then I was like, why not open source? So that is how I started with the owner of Kodes Cafe. But yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Jyoti. So, and our second guest is Animesh Pathak. Animesh is developer relations engineer at the Harness. His work focused on the database DevOps, APIs testing, developer workflow, and the open source technologies. He is the guy who understands technologies so depth. That's why we are taking help him to understand MCP in the depth. He also worked closely with the engineering communities, have experience simplifying the complex technical subjects for the developers. So, welcome to the podcast, Animesh.
Thanks, Rajan. I'm really happy to be here. And yeah, so over the past year, I think AI agents or MCPs or the prompt engineering have been subject of debate as well as the curiosity a lot. That's where even my expertise comes in. Over the last year, I think we have experimented as much as we can to learn and build the MCP servers, not just the Harness MCP server, but our own, whether it's a Docker MCP, Kubernetes MCP, and our personal own.
Sounds great.
Happy to share.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Anything, Jyoti, you would like to add on for about your journey across the your developer relationships and the open source product and any AI
Yeah, of
agents?
course. So I got into DevRel because I was very interested in coding, but also I really like talking to people. And that is how I got into open source and developer relations. So recently I got involved with AAIF. So AAIF is the organization that does the MCP Dev Summit where we all met. So, and that is when MCP Dev Summit had its CFPs out, we submitted because they've been very vocal about how they want to promote the MCP infrastructure, the agentic AI infrastructure. And I think this is like a great platform to talk about these things. And naturally, when MCP came out, it was like a big buzzword because everybody wanted to try it out. We were trying it out and we were like, why not just get involved with contributing a CFP to the foundation that started it all?
Sounds great. Thank you, Jyoti. And Animesh, I've seen a lot of content around the MCP. You've been working a lot. So, I mean, from the background and the involvement with the AI agent and MCP, how did you start it? Like, what's your journey?
Um, so interestingly, I started building from skills. When MCP was announced, I was thinking it was some another fact term that have came up after Claude and Sonnet.
Mhm.
So I was mostly playing around when the skills were launched um, to help mitigate my daily tasks, small reminders. Eventually, when MCP came into much more like at the frontier, I would say, when the MCP Kubernetes came up, Docker MCPs came up, that's where I actually dived in to know if this is something new,
Mhm.
what is new about it, how does it work. Um, Previously, with due to my API experience, I'm very curious when the new protocols get launched, whether it's the recent HTTP query protocol or something. So I thought it's a simple API with a new provisioning, whether like we had a gRPC, right?
Yeah,
WebSocket. So the MCP is something new.
right.
So that's how my journey or introduction to MCP started. But then it went into the different level on how we are doing with working with the productions or with AI agents, LLM RAG system on how it works, how we can mitigate those things, and that's that's pretty much about it.
That
Still learning about it. Yeah.
sounds great. Sounds great. So now I will hand over the screen to you, both of you guys. You can walk us through about the uh, topics we are going to discuss and the presentation. But as you guys are watching the podcast, you really need to understand this presentation is going to give you a depth understanding about the topic, and we will return with some deeper questions about that is something going to help you a lot, go in depth and take the understanding. So now, Jyoti and Animesh, it's on you now. Can you guys walk us through about the
Yeah,
topics
I
we have?
can just share my screen
Sure.
maybe and I can start with the first set of slides and then Animesh can take over. Great. Are you able to see my slides?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So, hi everybody. We are not going to make it boring at all because everybody knows how much people hate boring slides. So, we already introduced who we are. So, I'll just directly get into the slides. So, over here in this presentation, we'll just cover what skills are, what MCP servers are, and the decision framework, which is basically the entire backbone of this entire presentation, which is one question that will help you understand and cut the confusion as to when to use skills, when to use MCPs, and then we will have a demo, and then we'll have some questions towards the end. So, what is a skill? So, if you look at over the internet, if you just do a quick research or a quick Google search. A skill is a file that tells your AI agents or your any coding assistant about what instructions to follow, what to do, where to go next. So think of your AI agent as it does not have any memory. It has everything fed into its system, but it does not know about your particular code base. So, for example, if you're using Devin, you open your repository and you want to make changes to it, but you as an engineer, you know the flow of it, which function should be called when, and what should be done after that. So that is where a skill comes in place, so that you don't have to explain it to your agent again and again, like, okay, you can type 10 prompts 10 different times, but why do you want to do that? So, just to give you an overview, a skill can be used when you need a stable domain knowledge. So, for example, you tell your agent in a skill that um, you have to run some test on a PR, and these are the checks I want you to run. This is how you structure a policy, a pipeline. This is the best practices for a PR that you need to follow. The second thing that it could help you with is persona shaping. So, for example, I need to tell my agent that. So, I write documentation a lot. So, if I tell them that, hey, you are a senior technical writer and this is what you prioritize, this is what you deprioritize, and things like that. In our example, you can also tell them, for example, that you are a DB DevOps engineer. So, you have to prioritize rollback safety over deployment speed. So, this is how you shape personas. And then the third thing is convention and guardrails. So it could be naming conventions, required field, warning signs to check. Like, of course, all of us have warning signs. They do not fail in QA, they do not fail in testing, they always fail in production when you're making a PR. So why not just tell your agent from the very start what conventions and guardrails to follow? So this is like a quick overview of what a skill is. If you want to see some examples, Claude already has some skills on its own app, so you can definitely check it out there. Now, coming to the MCP server, which is like a very popular term right now because it actually disrupted the way our agents talk to external environment. Like for us humans, for example, how do we collaborate with the external world? We go on Google search, we go and read, right? That is our domain knowledge, that's our domain expertise. But how do your agents connect with your database? So I was taking the example of Devin recently that your code is already there, your agent has access to it, but what if that code is calling an external database? What happens then? How does it happen? How does it connect to the web? And that is where an MCP server comes in. It is basically, think of it as a USB-C type for your AI agents. That is like the most popular example that people give. It is basically plug and play for your AI agents. You can connect it to no matter whatever you want. And when would you actually need an MCP server? When would you actually use it? So, for example, you need live data, right? That is one example that I gave you, that if you are working in a repository and it is calling some external services, you need live data, you need production data, then you can use it. You need side effects. What we mean by side effects is definitely not the side effects that we mean in real life. It's basically telling them that, hey, can you create a pipeline? Can you trigger a rollback? Can you apply a migration? These are actions and not instructions. So basically, if my agent, I'm telling them that this is the best practice of how to create a PR, that is a skill that is defined in the skill. But if I'm telling them that go and create that PR for me, that is one of the side effects that you can actually put into action. Next is state changes at runtime. So this is one of the main, most popular question that engineers have to answer, that what broke in the last deployment. And the answer to that will change every hour. Just yesterday, I was fixing something and then it broke something else. That got fixed, but something else broke. And if the state is consistently changing at runtime in your production, that is some live data that you need to fetch. Last but not the least is dynamic schema recovery. So, for example, if you have a database that you need to query, you need to find out answers to it, and you don't want to, like, skills cannot help you query that, but MCP, with the help of MCP servers, the AI agents can definitely help you do that. So now the main question, now that we have understood that what an MCP is, what a skill is, this might come into your head that, okay, but aren't like both the same, or aren't like both actually doing what needs to be done? Like, they are providing context to my AI agent, they're telling how to behave, they're telling what to do, right? The difference is actually quite obvious, but not very understandable very easily. So, if you have a decision framework, if you have a decision question in mind, that if you're going to do a task, does this require information or actions that exist outside this conversation? This is the one question that you need to ask yourself. And if that particular thing gives you an answer of no, then you use a skill, which is basically you don't need to connect to external environment. You don't need to go outside. That is where you use a skill, because as we just discussed, that the knowledge is very stable, right? So for example, there are workflow conventions, step order, best practices, guardrails, naming conventions. They're not going to change that rapidly. So yeah, definitely use a skill. But if it does require information that exists outside the conversation, for example, you're calling a database, you're calling a link on or URL on the web page that is consistently changing, then definitely use an MCP server, because you need that live data to take actions. And the answer is changing between conversations. And if the state is changing, then you definitely need to use an MCP server. Now, this thing is not very mutually exclusive, I would say. That skills and MCP, yes, they can be used together. They don't have to always run parallel. The question is not always this or that. But in each step of execution, in each step of your particular workflow, you can use skills and MCP together. And this is a very powerful combination, honestly, because if in your skills you're defining the steps of what to do, your MCP is helping you execute those steps independently, right? So over here is a very small example. So we tell if I tell my AI agent that can you debug my fail pipeline, right? So Claude will read the skills file and see that okay, what is the workflow logic, and it will load into the context, right? So for example, a skill file says that you always have to call harness describe function before harness create to get the current schema. And it also says if pipeline fails, then call the harness diagnose function with the execution ID and then check logs. So these are the steps. Now, what the MCP server will do, it will run live API calls. It will actually call Harness APIs, return live execution data, and also give you error codes, whatever is running. Because how will you know otherwise what is failing and what is not failing? So skills are basically telling what to do, and MCP server is actually helping you to do that. So what the result is that your agent then knows how to debug, execute, and can access what to debug and execute. So I would say that neither alone is enough, but there will be a demo to just show you that.
Okay, thanks a lot for the demo. And from here, we can continue our conversation around it. Like we have understand a lot of concept about the MCP, the basic thing that we really need to understand in the depth. But again, the understanding of that particular topic is come up with a couple of the questions that we really need to understand and explore that. So let me quickly summarize what I understand. A skill giving the agent the knowledge, process, and the guidance to approach a task correctly. And an MCP server connect that agent to live data, external system, and the real action. So the skill explains what should happen while the MCP server helps make it happen. So with this foundation, let me move into a deeper questions now. So the question to the anime is first because we see in the demo. The presentation explained that the skill should guide the workflow while the MCP server should handle the execution. But a model can misunderstood or skip an instruction in a production workflow like we all seen have, such as the database migration, which is critical, or the deployment or any rollback, which
Right.
protection must be enforced by the MCP server or the underlying platform instead of trusting the skill.
So I would say this is an important distinction that sometimes people miss. A skill is only a guidance, right? It's not a enforcement. It won't tell the model that this is the recommended. Like it can tell the model that this is the recommended one flow. Step one will always come before step two, but it won't put the guardrails around the model to follow it, right? So in production general, a standard case or a best practices is to have like let the model make mistakes, but the server is acting as a security guard or a guardlate for him. So obviously in a workflow, when we are talking about database migration or a deployment migration, even the workflow from dev to staging to the prod, everything will happen on a platform, right? So in that case, have a platform act as a source of truth. So where we can put our governance in, like extra security in, build our own custom logic. Okay, these are the things um, that it has to follow. So let me take an example. um, for example, a deployment, right? Before a deployment, generally we validate whether you or me have a permission to push into that specific branch. So like those validation should happen first. Then we check, once we have merged, it's in going to the pipeline, we check whether which version should we build on, what are the valid parameters or the required if anything is missing. We check whether the resources are available or not. For example, for our CI/CD, whether the Linux general VM that we use is available or not. So those kind of things can happen only with the platform when it's acting as a source of truth. If that is in a place, even if the skill forgets to say, like forgets to say check the execution status first, or the MCP server should still refuse the unsafe operation, like a destructive operations, the platform will be there. Skills can define intent, MCP can enforce those policy, and then the platform can guarantee your safety. So whether we are having a conversation with either a Harness, Jenkins, Tecton, anything which we use in a day to day for deployment purposes, we have a safe philosophy, and that's on the top of what DevOps have been doing for a lot of years. So they eventually DevOps do not, I think, trust even the scripts which are enforcing the security.
Yeah.
They mostly trust the platform. Okay, these the platform I have built, I have known what is going through. So that is again still the most common relevant for the, if we want to guarantee the safety and not dependent on the skills or MCP.
Okay, so as a branch question out of this particular question is, what if something goes wrong? What is the procedure generally people have for the monitoring? Like, how do they know? Okay, something is now wrong.
So mostly again it uh, so there are two different ways how it's going right now. Let me go one by one. First is having skill already defined it. If the things go wrong, what are the possible scenarios it could go wrong?
Right.
We could define maybe the resource constraint. In that case, when retry, the MCP server will call it with the increased resources if it's possible. Or second case would be things workflow was happening, but there was a permission issue or the manual step required for me or you to review it and then approve it. In that case as well, the MCP will put, okay, I have done this. The skill will complete its workflow and then shut down. In the first scenario, the workflow is again autonomous. It can be refixed. In the second flow, you or I have to review it and then do. This is the one way. We define everything in a skill, and the skill, the MCP follows the parameters or the troubleshooting. If we say, okay, these are the expected results, and in this expected behavior or constraints or resources, behave in this manner. That's an autonomous. Second is having already a inbuilt observability tools. A lot of us generally use telemetry, Prometheus, or Grafana to trigger the alerts, right? So as soon as we see, okay, it was moving into the production, suddenly it failed. So why it failed? That can again MCP tell us, but why needs a much more depth. Maybe suddenly there was an internal server error not related to the workflow or the changes that I have made. It could be just sometimes GitHub went down or Zoom went down. It's a right. So in those cases, the observability tool will help us. So most of the standard process that I have seen is always a combination of these two. The skills will have the basic troubleshooting to help MCP. And as we find something new, which can be fixed autonomously, we add it into our skill intent. But if it's something still require much more depth from a developer's perspective or the platform side, then we have our observability tools in the place, which will call the fixes.
Yeah, okay, that is a really good depth explanation. So, for that particular question, my understanding comes to the scenario where generally people really need to understand what they are building, and once the guardrail
Yes.
is there, they really need to understand. So, hiccups always will be there. It is just how we can reduce
Definitely.
that. So, you
Definitely.
can only reduce by you understand the platform first. And
Right.
because
Right.
of that particular decision framework, the next question is for the Jyoti. So, Jyoti, the decision framework works clearly for live informations generally. But what about the information that change slowly, such as the document, the policies, schemas? Sometimes there's a price rule for the people or the production configuration. How should a team decide whether that information belongs to skill or the context, an MCP server or the MCP server?
Yeah, actually, I feel when the information is changing slowly, freshness is not actually the main useful question that we need to ask ourselves. I feel the two better questions that we need to ask is that whether the information tells your model how to act or what is true. So, for example, your procedural knowledge, your conventions, your style, your correct sequence of steps that we were discussing, the things it should never do, the guardrails. These all belong in a skill because skills, as Animesh mentioned, are behavioral and change what the model does. Our facts will belong somewhere else. And the second question is what a stale or wrong answer can actually cost you. Because if the cost is low, for example, and there is no single canonical answer, it could be internal wikis, past decisions, design documents, then I feel retrieval is the right path to go about it because you are actually trying to find a relevant passage and you're trying to find what to do next and being approximately right when the cost is low is good enough. But if your information is canonical and it is addressable, and if it is small enough to read in full, it could be like a schema, config file, a policy document, then definitely you should make it an MCP resource.
Yeah, sounds great. And that is really people need to understand. Okay, around this particular question, there is a very basic question, but still a lot of people have. Nowadays, people are working on shifting between the models while they are working. And once they are shifting between the models to select the right model for the particular answer, does it have any impact on the decision framework?
Yeah, definitely. I feel that because the other talk that I gave at MCP Dev Summit was that why if agents make different decisions with the same tooling. So even if there are same tooling and same models, you can see your agents are behaving a bit differently, and that is why we have these benchmarks in place. So I feel yes, definitely that can impact it. Not so much with skills because it will just tell you the steps how to do it, but with MCP servers and the information that they receive, they it definitely depends on the thinking capability. How are they going to process that particular information that they've fetched?
Yeah, definitely. Because this is the question I got generally in the event. Like, okay, because the token consumption is so high and we need a way to shuffle between the models. But the problem is the framework seems unstable when we shuffling between the models. So I like this is one of the things people really
Yeah.
need to understand how to handle such scenarios. Great. In that particular presentation, the next question maybe I can ask to the Animesh is the agent can discover the current resources schemas instead of relying entirely on the hard coded instructions. What happens when the skill describe an older workflow, but the MCP server expose a new schema or a changes tool contract? How should team version test or release skills and the MCP servers together?
For first of all, we should never define anything into our skills except the MD format. Anything. I have seen a lot of people do add their Python script and such, which which should not be there, and that is exactly why even I think anyone who works with the MCP will recommend to use it as a discovery instead of even when we are building a MCP server. um, we want API calls to happen in the real time, right? Not have it like a hard coded specific versions and such. Because, for example, as I mentioned of a Python script, assume if the skill assume that the field exists, because it is the skills generally live in our local environment, right?
Yeah.
In our IDs or in a global environment settings. Now, what will happen since it lives locally? It has no idea how many changes uh, have been made on our remote repositories. It may be just a week, but with the fast pace, how everything is working around in this space specifically, a field might have been changed. The field key pair value, even the how they are presented, have been changed.
Yes.
So if skills assume that the field exists but the server is calling for the real information, there will be a clash between them. Not necessarily that both are wrong, it just they have not been updated to communicate properly, which comes around that required parameters that we earlier talked about. Both are sending the details which are right according to them. So treat skills like just a discovery tool, how we had a describe schema first, right? Understand the latest schema. So that is the only function of the skill that we had in a demo. And then from the engineering perspective, it was MCP, which was checking, okay, this skill exists. Okay, what its schema types are, what things does the schema have in its place, what it is calling, where the Git source of truth lives for that specific thing. And when we version them independently, we should always maintain the backward compatibility wherever possible. It's not that we have evolved, but then it's failing for our previous customers or a version. So even right, even the MCP protocol have evolved from HTTP and SSE to streamable HTTP, but they're still maintaining the HTTP plus SSE. So if by chance there are some dependencies or a heavy dependency someone is using in their product, should live. They should not cost their clients or customer and such. So a basic contract should be in place, which like a test suite or such, which ensures that the skills are working against the newer version, and same for the MCP servers with the outdated skill model functionality. Okay, it's still able to give the data, provide information, but maybe not act on it if you have deprecated those.
Sounds great. And that again, the versioning is the context you guys really need to understand in depth. Because
Yes,
if you really, so imagine every time you have a new skills to be there, and you cannot just say it will work. You really need to understand
you
how.
need to check.
Yeah, you need to check. So never imagine it's more like skill is need to be tested. Like the old theory, if you really need a weapon, you need to learn how to use a weapon. Otherwise, in the war,
Yes.
you have no idea how to use that weapon. Yeah,
Yes, and I think that is exactly how the agents are behaving these
exactly.
days, right? Most of the time, the agent gets a context when it's running, like at a runtime, it gets, rather than assuming that, okay, yesterday, it has a yesterday's or a bit of old context as well. But most of the context we need to check or make sure that the agents validate at the runtime.
Yes,
Uh, there could have been a change, maybe not today, day after tomorrow, or yesterday, but definitely in this week, if there's a change, the old context validation is right, but the explicit version negotiation between our client server or skills MCP or platform should be maintainable. It's not
exactly.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, it breaks as soon as we ship it.
Yeah, right, right. And I do agree with that. So, in terms of this skill, the next question I have, Jyoti, for you is how do we prove that skill is genuinely improving the agent instead of simply adding more and more context, and that will speed up the token uses, which should teams measure before and after introducing a new skill?
Yeah, that is actually a very correct question to ask, honestly, because a lot of the people, it's like in previous years, we used to have a formula for when to automate a thing or when to not automate. I feel it is like that. But if I'm being honest, you cannot prove the skill is right or not just by reading it, because you need to see actions, you need to have baseline, and you need to compare on the same tasks. So I would just recommend that first build your evaluation set before you write the skill, which is basically what do you want to test it on, what do you want your skill to do, and then write the skill. Helps you write better skills, of course. And I feel there are three things that you should answer after you are running your evaluation test. Is basically the success rate. The first question is your did it work? What is the success rate? And second question would be that how much did it cost you to do this, right? You can track, as you mentioned about the token cost, you can track your token consumption, you can track how much tokens and it costed you for task, you can track your latency, because if a skill is loading large files or it is triggering extra tool calls, then it can quietly double your consumption, right? And third and the last one that I feel most of the teams might skip is did it break anything? So is your skill actually, instead of building something, quietly breaking anything? So you need to check for regressions on unrelated tasks. So for example, you have an evaluation set that you're running your skill against. That is great. That has given you 100% success rate. That is amazing. But is it breaking something that is totally unrelated, right? Because instructions bleed. So for example, if you're writing some code that is not tested for every edge case, or it is not optimized enough, it will bleed into other pieces, right? Then I feel this is something very important, and yeah, I think these are three main things. I would also say that the decisive test is actually ablation, that you have to take the skill away and you have to rerun, and if the scores do not drop, the model already knew about it, then you should probably just not use it or just make it better. And yeah, just experiment and try, but also the idea is not to try so much that it will increase your token consumption even when you're trying it out, right? So yeah, I feel these three things are the main thing that you need to do.
Right, and that's really insightful because this is one of the things that generally make people confused about what is the right tuning between uh, the skill and the user's tokens. That is really people really need to understand. Okay, if it is comes to the DevOps workflow specific, Animesh, one more question for you is in agent-driven DevOps workflows. There was a multiple layers are involved,
Right,
like the
right.
model and then skill and then the tool section, MCP client, and then top of it the MCP server,
Yes.
and comes with the API, and there's a lot of things and the actual pipeline.
Right.
When the final result is wrong, how do you identify which layer caused the problem?
That's an interesting question. So generally, I approach it the same way we approach our when we are doing a Git release,
Yes.
right? I don't assume that the AI is the problem first. First, I try to break down everything into the layers, as you said. So, starting with the model, understand the request. Because if the model couldn't understand the request, there could be a problem on how my skills have provided the guidance, or the intent may be mismatch, right? But if the request, the model understood my request, it means the skills are right. Then it depends on the MCP side, whether the MCP might have chosen some wrong tool, or it chose the tool with the different parameters which were maybe not properly inputted to the platform itself, or the validation request might have failed. There could be the 500 errors, which in most of the cases are coming up as a 500
Yeah.
internal server error, or the resource not found is the another one. So if those are causing an issue, then I know it's on my MCP side. Then I check with, okay, maybe towards my network issue that could have led this, that the prompt or the request ended in the midway. If those are validated correctly, then I come to the platform. So I saw my final error, like my final result is wrong. But in the chain, I come to the platform at the last, because if my skill and model are right, then there is something that's on the platform side, maybe some resource that I had put. Maybe, for example, to make a certain release, I needed a Git commit SHA, but the commit SHA was never there, or it was tied to my repository, but the repository authentication have failed on the platform itself. So that's not on the MCP side, because what I have built is to trigger the pipeline, make sure the pipeline is working fine, not to debug it. And if that, then that's the endpoint. If the platform executed correctly, why I'm getting my results, then there could be some additional resources that it required which it's failing. So layer by layer I go it, from like bottom to the top, rather than just finding, okay, platform failed, why it failed. Let's start, if my request was even valid or not. Because when we talk about MCP a lot, MCP or the tools that it has, a lot of time it could be just the tools may not exist anymore, or they have evolved into a version which I was not aware of. So it could be everything is working fine, but again leading to a false result or a bad result. And I think most of the times, as I said, in nowadays, would either depend on the resource itself was not found, or 500 internal error. They are not because of AI models or AI failures. They are generally due to the permission issues, or the bad input, or the schemas got outdated, or maybe the API that I am having a conversation with may require some additional access. For example, if I'm working with a VPN on,
Yes.
maybe that specific platform do not allow people using VPN, the network, the request where it come from, and those could be the issues or the reasons behind it. So that's why breaking down into how we debug our normal pipeline becomes valuable.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like in every layer, if we have the observability about how
Yes,
things is behaving, that actually helping us to simplify what particular component is doing what. And my
yes,
theory specifically on that scenario is if it is fail, it should fail
Yeah.
fast. At least
yes,
before do any kind of the hallucination which predict an error that belongs to not that particular layer. If we can fail
right.
fast, that can produce a right information that can simplify what's going wrong with that. So that's my understanding. If you want to add on more with that.
Yeah, yeah. I would just like to add on, like it. Then that's why it becomes very important to
Yeah.
have those try catch error
Yeah.
things that we used to
Right.
have at each layer, so that we have traces on what is going on, tool call logs, that's how it going on, and proper error structure, so that we just do not see it's an error, but what the error is about.
Exactly.
So which will help me debug it.
So
Okay.
those are the legendary old tricks that human will never give away the try catch. That's
Yes,
how
I
help us a
guess.
lot about learning the concepts. Okay,
Yes.
that is great about the developer experience. And specifically for the developer experience prospect, I have a question for Jyoti you one more time. Is what should a team publish along with a skill and MCP integration so that the another developer can understand, evaluate, and trust it?
Yeah, that is actually a very good question because everything that we do is for developer experience at the end of the day. So I would just think of it as think of shipping a skill or an MCP like you're shipping a library. So if you're an engineering team, what you think about is the end result first, right? That what you want to do, and then you backtrack that how you're
Yes.
going to create it, and that is exactly how you should apply the logic over here as well. That just define what your purpose is, define very clearly what you want your skills and MCP servers to do. Define also the failures and the point of failures because if your scope is not taking failures into consideration, then I feel it is not good enough. And then next, when it comes to execution, right? When is your skill actually going to work? When is your MCP server actually going to call? Right? You have to define the trigger. The trigger description should be like, for example, a public API, I would say, because it determines when all your skills load. For example, when I'm talking to Claude and I'm asking it to design something, it knows automatically that I have a design skill already. It is my own color scheme, everything. It knows when to fire that, right? So I would do that. Also, definitely, you need to also publish the known misfires. The case where it triggers, but it shouldn't. Like for my case, it triggers in case of social media as well, which I do not want it to do. So just being upfront about it also helps build trust a lot. And then the question comes is, can we trust it? Is our engineering trusting it, right? If we are able to tell others, if we are able to tell customers, or if we are able to tell developers that these are the evaluation sets and these are the results, these are the success rates, right, with and without skills, also just the regression with unrelated tasks, I feel it helps them understand better. It helps them also trust your entire tech stack and product as well, because the way I see it is, if you do not have a baseline, the numbers are just uh, a sort of decoration, right?
It is. It is. I agree.
And if you're talking about just MCP specifically, you need to make sure which tools read and which write, because as you know, right, read and write access humans understand, but how will agents understand which, where they need to just read and where they need to have write access as well, and what are the some destructive actions, right? And you also need to document the auth, the data scope, what it can see, on which behalf it can see, and what actually leaves your own boundary. So if you are shipping just one artifact, you can just ship a short README with probably just 5 6 sections where you cover failure this fixes, when it fires, how much it costs, the
Yeah.
before and after numbers, and who owns it. So I think, yeah, just treat it like a library, a very good library that you really want your customers and your developers to use.
Yeah, and that specifically triggered me a thing like that's the old habit. If a team does not understand what it is doing, the first thing they have in their mind is I will build myself again from scratch.
Exactly. Yeah, I
Right.
don't want to
So
do that.
that's been a old one. Yeah. So that is very important for team members to understand that really need to simplify that should be trusted, and people can actually evaluate that. Otherwise, the next thing they want to do is they're going to replicate the task again unless they are not sure what it's doing.
Exactly.
So yeah,
Exactly. And that is like the
So
spirit of open
exactly.
source. Either they contribute something to you, or if they hate it so much, they will just create it on their own.
I agree. I agree. Okay, so generally we're done with covering a lot of question answer and a lot of things around it. But I know there's a couple of thoughts in my mind, and that's kind of like interesting. So let me ask you a very base question, which is nothing to do with your expertise, but it's more with the general thought behavior. So imagine for a second the MCP server become your office colleague for a moment. Now, how you imagine that particular guy?
That is a very nice question, honestly.
Yeah.
I feel like an MCP server is like a product marketing person who knows who has the technical expertise to do stuff, but also knows how to communicate really well, because that is how your AI agents connect to the external world. So yeah, that is how I would imagine my colleague to be. I don't know about Animesh. What do you think?
I would consider it as like a new joining, more
That
on that
same thought.
front.
Yes.
Yeah, because as a new joinee, it have all the documents that I have shared
Hmm.
with him.
Right.
He has the context on how to act on those documents, but that's all. It's up to me to have a build with him. Okay, these are the things in which you have to behave this way, or these are the works, these are the instructions that you have to follow in this way. So I'll treat it like more a new software joining.
And exactly the same thought I have. Just the top of the layer is an intern who joined or a fresher who joined who know a lot more than about what the way I am thinking. He can execute better than me. So the problem is the time I was thinking, he just get it things done. So that make me worried if
Uh,
what he breaks something and he don't understand. So at the same time, I would like to take his help. Okay, I'm your senior. I want to do this work. You have to do this work.
Yeah.
But I also need to figure out a way. It should not be breaking anything which make a bigger impact on my things.
Yeah.
So
right.
I really need to fine tune how to give the instruction to him, do work based on or behalf on me, and at the same time, I should get the credit. That's how I imagine that particular intent. Yeah, this is what the way I understand a lot of things around, because imagining the technology sometimes simplify our thought process, and
Mm.
such kind of the question I always seen in some events. Like, okay, one more question I have: can you share one real case where actually you made an MCP or a workflow that simplify your execution in your personal experience?
Got it. I think in my case, it was a lot more to do with um, deployment and stuff, because even the commits that I am doing
Mm-hmm.
is manual, right? That the skills help me. Um, MCP have done to ship my artifacts more or less, like the releases on it. The pipeline governance, it have
Yeah.
helped me. So, for example, if I have a Git workflow or a YAML, simple YAML workflow, right? I am deploying. I have a set of instructions or a tools that within the MCP which calls those specific based on the steps or the stage it is at. Uh, I have provided a context which leaves like, just for now, let's not complicate things. Let's assume that it's just an environment variable where all my additional inputs from a user side is present.
Yeah.
My MCP server just reads it, find the relevant tools that it can call within itself to and use those in my pipeline. So, for example, in my pipeline, I have specific version tagging,
Mm-hmm.
git commit shars, the release, or the if there is any key cloak authentication required, my authentication keys, to use those into that pipeline, use in the CI stage, CD stage before it deployment, and once it has deployed, it is to check um, if it's available on three places. So it was I was deploying into a uh, registries on a Git Docker registry and GitHub registry. Sorry, Docker registry both, and one was pointing at the npm registry. It was a package release manager. So it used to tell me which passed and which failed, and where it is live right now with the URL specific. So I could just click it, download it, and check it whether it's working or not. So this was a sample that I was working with, because primarily I work with a lot of packages. I like I'm come from an era where Discord is still very popular. We build Discord servers, we build Discord packages. That was the time when we started getting into the tech itself.
Yeah.
So most of my packages are around Discord. So that's why it's important, if someone is using a Docker image, it should be publicly available. Or if they're building on top of it, then the npm should be available for them. So that's why it came into the picture very recently last year.
Yeah, that is a good one, to be honest. Okay, that's great. One more question, Jyoti, for you is, like, in the past, as a speaker to speaker, we have built a lot of demos that we need to give in the presentation. Any story where you build a demo, it was working fine, and at the time you need to give a demo, never works?
So yes, this happens almost all the time, and we call it the demo curse, because that things are working fine, and as soon as you have to demo, it is not working at all. And I have fixed it like 5 minutes earlier than this, earlier than the demo, 10 minutes earlier than the demo. It has happened almost all the time. To answer your question.
Yeah, it's one of the thing. So the people generally figure out that they have given amazing demo at the time of the event. Telling you the backend story, it was like a little bit of luck plus the expertise, so we can fix the demo at the time just before the event. So that's the backend story. So thanks a lot, Jyoti and Animesh. The discussion make one point very clear: skill and MCP servers are not competing the technologies. They solve different part of the problem. A skill provides specialized
Yes.
knowledge, and they explain how an agent should approach a workflow. And the MCP server connects the agent to the live information, external system, and the real action. The right architecture comes from the clearly separating those responsibilities. So before building anything, teams should first understand whether the agent only need the guidance and the reusable knowledge, or whether it also need access to change information and external capabilities. Once these boundaries is clear, the technical decision become much easier. So, Jyoti and Animesh, thank you for joining me and for sharing your experience and the practical insights. To everyone watching or listening, thank you for joining us on Demo Production.